Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Lauren Hogan, the Senior Director for Public Policy and Advocacy at NAEYC. We appreciate you all taking the time with just less than 2 weeks to this year's presidential election to talk with us today about the Early Ed for President campaign and all of the work that we've been doing this year in the lead up to the election. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how we've set this campaign up, the messages that we founded this on, and the work that we've done over the last few months, and what you can do in these last incredibly important 2 weeks leading up to the election to elevate early childhood education and educators. I want to begin by just walking us back to the time that NAEYC last year conducted some market research survey. And this has been incredibly informative in our work for the Early Ed for President campaign. We did a wide-ranging market research on the image of the early childhood profession, on how people feel about early childhood educators. We talked to 900 voters, American voters, in states and communities all across the country. What we found was that people really understand the most important age for developing a child's capacity to learn starts early. About 62% of voters recognize the ages of birth to 5 as the most important time for child development. And we're starting to take this understanding for granted, but we feel that this has really evolved in even just the last 10, 20 years. We're really excited to see that people understand the importance of these years and how important it is to begin investing in them. We know that 88% of voters view teaching young children as important work. And we don't always internalize this. Sometimes we feel still like we're seen as babysitters, but we've really come to see that people understand the importance of early childhood educators on par really with professions like nursing and firefighters, which are revered within American communities. Even further, we see that voters really recognize the connection between early childhood educators and quality. And that includes compensation and degrees. So people really understand the connection between early childhood educators and the quality that they need in early childhood education. They understand that increased access to early childhood education will have broad benefits for society. Not surprisingly, people have an easier time believing in the shorter-term benefits, like a smoother transition into kindergarten, that they're into kindergarten ready to learn. But the longitudinal studies that we've done over many years have really also seeped into voters' understanding about the benefits of early childhood education, that achievement gaps would be reduced, that local crime and incarceration rates would be reduced over the long term, with upwards of 3/4 of voters believing that those benefits will accrue to society through investment in early childhood education. When we asked about compensation for early childhood educators, we found that about 61% believe that early childhood educators are paid too little. And we always say we're going to track down the 3% who say that they're paid too much. We're not really sure who those folks are. And this, importantly, is before the voters were told how much early childhood educators actually make. This is just sort of in their conception of how early childhood educators are compensated. And so these 18% of folks who really don't know, once they find out how much early childhood educators are paid, they also become part of what becomes a very substantial majority of our voting population who really believes that early childhood educators are not compensated at a rate that is acceptable. We know from many surveys, many polls, that voters overwhelmingly support increased funding for early childhood education services. Time after time, if asked, voters across demographic, geographic lines that frankly sometimes often divide us really come together around support and investment in early childhood education. We can see that this crosses by party. Majorities of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans support increased investment in early childhood education. And you really see that reflected in the conversation within the election this year. Both presidential candidates of the two major parties talked about childcare, talked about the importance of investing in childcare, about supporting working families, all up and down Senate races, House races, state and local races. The conversation around early childhood education is really moving forward, bolstered by this support that really runs across party. We see support for increased funding by gender and age. Though there is a pronounced gender gap, particularly among voters over 50, we see the lowest levels of support among men who are over 50. And frankly, when we think about who makes up the majority of our elected officials in the United States, we can sort of see how the demographic of men over age 50 being the lowest level of support shows how much work we have to do as advocates to move this forward. We see support for increased funding by ethnicity. African Americans are among the most supportive, but the levels remain high among Latinos and whites as well. Sometimes folks find this a little surprising that parents are only modestly more supportive than our non-parents of early childhood education, but we really think that this also sort of harkens back to that understanding of the importance of the first 5 years in terms of investment in early childhood education, and that knowledge has really seeped in beyond parents. People understand and believe in the importance of investing in early childhood education as an investment in our economy and our communities, broadly speaking. The one thing that stood out to us within this survey was that we found that voters would support an investment in early childhood education with the understanding that that funding would go to increase wages. And again, this is really tied back to people's understanding of, first, the fact that educators aren't paid at a level that is acceptable, and second, that compensation is very much tied to the quality of the early childhood education program. Those two pieces really combine to show us the investment in ECE and where it should be directed. We were not necessarily expecting this continued high level of support, but we're really pleased to see that connection moving forward. And I think we've seen in a variety of places a really increased focus this year on wages and compensation that has really driven the conversation forward in a new way. Voters were comfortable, supportive of the idea of raising wages for early childhood educators across all settings, but there are differences. I don't think anybody will find it surprising that those who work with infants and toddlers under age 3 and those who work in home-based programs are deemed sort of the least likely to be are where folks have the least support for increasing compensation in those settings. And that sort of tells us about our work around how we think about this early childhood profession from birth to age 8 across settings and states. These are a few of the initial infographics that we developed around some of the materials that came out of this market research survey and the way that this sort of educators are heroes, thinking about the way in which quality is tied to compensation, thinking about how important it is to invest in early childhood education, have really informed the work of the Early Ed for President campaign. The last thing I want to focus on within the market research is a focus on the way that we thought about the messages to really move people forward. What are the reasons to support wage increases in early childhood educators? Brain development is a very strong message across, well, nearly everybody, from parents to policymakers, really respond to the brain development messaging. And what that's brought us over the last decade, 2 decades really, in thinking about how we make the case for ongoing investment in early childhood education. In addition, really thinking about this role models piece and the school readiness piece. This really plays to different audiences, but people were really able to see that these messages moved them forward. What we saw is after we shared these messages, voters were more likely to call early childhood educators extremely important after messaging. And I think that sometimes it seems like the difference between extremely important and very important is an issue of semantics, But the fact that we're able to move 14% of voters from thinking that it's very important to think that it's extremely important, the folks who advocate for issues, the folks who vote on issues, who become early childhood education voters, are the voters who believe that this is extremely important. Very important is not good enough. It has to be able to move to that level of, this is my issue, this is extremely important to me, this is the thing that I'm willing to vote on. And so the fact that we saw movement there was very heartening. We really took all of this research, all of our work over many years to inform our work on the Early Ed for President campaign. And so I'm going to walk through what we've done and how we've set that up. I'm going to pause briefly just to note that we do see questions coming through, and thank you so much for engaging and for asking those questions. We are going to respond to those. If anybody hasn't seen it, you can enter your questions in the box on the left-hand side of your screen where it says Ask a Question. Go ahead and ask them there. Some folks have already figured that out all on their own. So we encourage you guys to ask questions, and we'll be responding to them towards the end of the presentation. As we sort of set out to do the Early Ed for President campaign, this is NAEYC's first foray into electoral advocacy. And we really see this as the beginning of an ongoing electoral advocacy effort that really started with this race. It is powered by NAEYC. It's open to all individuals and organizations, and we've had wonderful partners, everybody from Child Care Aware to our affiliates to partners in the states and local communities. It's funded by our 16 for 16 campaign, and it is very much dedicated to elevating the conversation around early childhood education and early childhood educators in particular. Our goals have been to really build the skills and capacity that help early childhood educators become comfortable and effective in their own efforts. We keep everybody engaged and updated. There's information and resources and newsletters and social media and swag. The social media networks, they're amplifying these messages, have been an enormous part of this work and have really enabled us to reach out to new audiences who are not already bought into the importance of early childhood education but have really become engaged through this process, and really supporting state and local efforts to expand electoral advocacy activities, from phone banking to voter registration to all the activities that have been happening on the ground, and really helping people sort out in a nonpartisan, completely 501c3 context what they can and cannot do as part of an electoral advocacy effort. I think it can be overwhelming and it can be scary for folks at times to engage in electoral advocacy when we don't know what to do. And so that's been really part of this goal, is to really pull up the muscle from these amazing early childhood educators and advocates on the ground to really do this work in a powerful and really engaged way. We set out very early on our guiding principles. We know that rapid brain development lays the foundation for all the learning that follows from those first few years of a child's life. We know the importance of developmentally appropriate practice, and we know from the market research how important early childhood educators are to American voters and to our communities. Because of that, we believe that every presidential candidate can share a vision for our country in which all young children learn, thrive, and reach their full potential. And we really started with presidential candidates, but this really goes well beyond that. We talk about races all up and down the ballot. And the folks who have engaged with this on the ground have really taken that and run with it, with candidate forums and engagement with candidates, speaking to candidates about the importance of early childhood education to them and how important they want that to be to their candidate of their choice, regardless of who that candidate is or the party to which they belong. We believe that every candidate should be able to articulate those ideas and plans for making that vision a reality, And we believe that those ideas and plans, as different as they may be, must demonstrate how the candidate would do these three things that are really central to moving early childhood education forward. The first is expanding opportunity, the second is supporting excellence, and the third is valuing early childhood educator. This first piece around expanding opportunity really begins with families. We know that families support educators and educators support family, but there is a gap in the growing costs of accessing and providing high-quality early care and education. And what we want to know from candidates is how they would expand opportunity to give more young children the opportunity to participate in this high-quality early child care and education beginning at birth. The second piece is that we know from decades of research that if we sacrifice the quality, we will sacrifice the results. We know that everybody wants results. We want to know how each candidate would promote excellence to deliver on the promise of early childhood education, a promise that is predicated upon the brain development that's happening in those early years. Finally, we know that early childhood educators are the linchpin to high-quality early childhood education, and we want to know how each candidate would work to attract and retain highly qualified early childhood professionals to engage in this field. As we move forward with these principles in mind, we created a whole set of materials and resources to support everybody in engaging in the Early Ed for President campaign. This is a website that serves as the sort of landing page and repository for all of the Early Ed for President materials and information that flow through our social media and through the affiliates and partners. We've continued to add pieces on throughout this campaign. There's a new GOTV page that is around our Get Out the Vote efforts, really encouraging people to exercise the right and responsibility to vote, especially now that early voting is underway in many states, and to really sort of put out early childhood education wins all across the country, all up and down levels in communities, red and blue states, communities led by all different, in a bipartisan way, really looking at what those wins look like and how we're able to sort of elevate and magnify them. A big piece of the campaign's work has been via social media, and so when we launched our Facebook page in March of 2016, we started from scratch, and admittedly this was yesterday, we have about 103,211 likes. We get about an average of 400 new likes a day. The conversation is robust and engaging. There's new content and campaigns rolling out nearly every day, and so there's really a lot of meat for folks to engage with. Over 500,000 impressions per month, and you can see one of the top posts just really generates a lot of interest and activity. We're also very active on Twitter. Our hashtag is the Early Ed in 16 hashtag, and we've used that for Twitter chats during the conventions back in July, during the debates that have happened over the past couple of months. We are over about 2,500 followers, and again, sort of constantly engaging and putting out materials and resources and information for folks to connect to. These are some of the campaigns that we've rolled out. Republican or Democrat, we won't know for years, but we do know that her brain will never grow this fast again. We can't wait to invest in her future. I don't know if everybody can see the infographic on the side, but that says if everyone running for president went to preschool with us, they'd learn how to play nicely. That particular line was developed very early on in this campaign, but it has continued to prove relevant. And we have another sort of campaign about what would 45 say, where we've really gone back and looked at some of the quotes from our presidents throughout the years, anticipating what President 45 might say. These are some of the work that we've done with affiliates and members, bi-weekly calls, sharing updates and opportunities, TA. We have a very extensive affiliate action guide that has supported many of our affiliates in doing candidate forums, local celebrations, meeting with staff, affiliate conferences where Early Ed for President has been featured and where members are really engaging in Early Ed for President. Just a couple of weeks ago, we engaged in another round of a voter survey, sort of asking folks where they were now and how they felt about Early Ed in this particular campaign. We really found that a majority of voters think that child care and early education had not gotten enough attention in the presidential race, that although many actually felt like they had a good understanding of where the candidates stand, they wanted to know more. And one thing that we found was that a majority of voters said that they would be more likely to support a candidate who supports increasing investments in early childhood education, even if they disagree with the candidates on other issues. That was true for nearly 50% of Republicans, 50% of independents, and nearly 75% of Democrats. And so we really see the importance of people wanting to hear about, learn from the candidates, and really figure out what they wanted to engage in. You can actually download some of the infographic information in the box on the left-hand side. So voter survey information is there on the America Stands with Early Ed infographic that's available for you to download and to look at. So what can you do? In these 6 months since the launch, we've gained over 100,000 supporters and new content campaigns rolling out every day. But as you know, this is a numbers game, and we need everybody to raise their voice and engage. So there are lots of ways to do that. You can encourage friends and networks to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You can sign the supporter wall at Early Ed for President so that you receive lots of the information, opportunities to engage, resources, and downloads. You can use slides and resources like this one, which we've been sharing with affiliates and partners for their conferences. This is also available to download in the event resources on the side. Voting Early Ed for President because this is the Count Me In, I Believe in Early Ed for President sheet. And we really encourage folks to engage, lift this up, share it on social media with your friends, both within your early childhood education community and beyond. We are, as you know, less than 2 weeks away. Some of you may have voted already, depending on what state you are in. Voter registration deadlines have passed for many of you, but there are states where same-day voter registration remains available. That information is all available on the website through on the Get Out the Vote section. You can link and find out when your voter registration deadlines are, what you need to bring to vote. This is really an opportunity to take action, to show up, to continue to show up at all levels and explain to the candidates how important early childhood education is to you and therefore how important it should be to them because you are a voter. This is also an opportunity to really elevate voting opportunities for the parents who drop off the kids in the morning at your centers, for the people, the employees, the child care workers, the educators who work in your centers to make sure that they have the opportunity to go vote. This is not about telling people who to vote for. This is about making sure that they understand the importance of early childhood education as they go to cast their vote for whomever they choose to vote for as their candidate of choice. But it is about making sure that we elevate the opportunity to vote and that we really rally people to engage in this electoral process. We have phone banking scripts that we're happy to share and post as a resource. We regularly do phone banking. We'll do phone banking at our annual conference. I hope some of you will be joining us next week in LA. We'll be doing phone banking where we call NAEYC members and we say, thank you so much for being an NAEYC member. Please remember to go out and vote tomorrow. Well, on Tuesday. We'll be calling on Thursday. Perhaps if you are not at conference and you are an NAEYC member, you will get phone banked. We encourage folks to wear their buttons, T-shirts, and to really post those with pride. We're really looking forward to this annual conference next week where we have our walk, our closing session, rally, selfie walls, and get out the vote stations where we're really elevating all of this work around making sure that people are embracing and running with the Early Ed for President campaign. And finally, our executive director and deputy executive director really love that I close out with this slide. This is our executive director, Rian Alvin, and our deputy executive director, Marika Mitchell, who are embracing the spirit of Early Ed for President. This is the selfie wall that we used at NAEYC's PDI, Professional Development Institute, back in June. And their spirits are strong, and we were excited to see it. We know that this has been just a really exciting and engaging campaign for us. And we hope that those of you who have been engaged, we're grateful to you for your support. And those of you who are new to this campaign, we welcome you and look forward to continuing to engage you as we transition out of this election and into all of the work to come. I'm going to look back at some of the questions. So the first question is, why do we think support is so low for nonprofit centers? Let's go back on up to that slide so folks can see what we're looking at. I will say that we don't ask about motives for why people think a certain way. So everything that I'm about to say is pure speculation. But my guess is that as people think about what nonprofit means, people have an understanding in their heads about nonprofits being associated with not getting paid that much. And without the early child, this will come as no surprise to anybody here, the early childhood education field is complex. The way that we're sort of constituted as where people get their education and care can be really confusing for folks, and I don't know that voters make a distinction between a nonprofit center, a for-profit center, a family child care home, people don't quite make those distinctions in their minds. What a Head Start center is, a state pre-K run classroom, and so having included the words nonprofit is just a signal to folks that that's not a place where people get paid very well. That would be my guess about that sort of understanding about support. It's not that they don't support nonprofit centers, it's just that that's not where they would direct their wage priorities. And that tells us something about how we have to change sort of people's understanding about this field. The next question. Did we ask voters whether they believe early childhood education teachers are compensated similarly to elementary public school teachers? I found many people are surprised by the difference. We also find many people are surprised by the difference, and I think that's why you'll hear a lot of conversation lately in particular, I think, around this idea of parity. I absolutely agree. We did not ask this question about whether or not they understood. I will say that in part of the market research, we did a focus group with prospective early childhood educators, so those who were considering becoming early childhood educators. And they, talked about their passion for children, sort of how excited they were, hearing about the field and the kind of work that we do. And we're all excited about potentially becoming early childhood educators. And then we talked about how much they made. And they were like, oh, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And so I think, when they understood, and I think you see that reflected in this increasing wages across settings, that public schools has a conception about what happens there that equates to people's understanding of compensation. And so I think we do have a lot to do for that particular work to really make sure that we're making the case about the importance of the skills, knowledge, and competencies in early childhood educators and how much less they're paid than public school teachers who have similar degrees and competencies. Do we have a list of politicians who have voted for early childhood education or know a way to find them? We did. So as a 501c3 organization, we do not either keep track of the elected officials or those running for office and how they vote on early childhood education. We do not endorse candidates. We do not endorse any candidates. And so there are lots of ways to find out how elected officials support early childhood education. Journalists do a very good job often of covering how people support early childhood education and how they've cast their votes. As you're thinking about who you want to vote for, I encourage you to reach out to candidates and their staff, to peruse their websites, their social media, where they talk about how they support the issues that are important to you so that you're informed to make those decisions. How will you increase wages without federal assistance that will equalize the playing field for all child care workers? There's a lot of conversation about how we as a field need to increase compensation, and it does involve a public investment for early childhood education. This cost of early childhood education cannot be borne solely by parents. We know that the cost of infant care, of toddler care, is astronomical and higher than rent in many places, higher than college tuition in most states. And so it does require support from state, local, and federal governments. NAEYC is leading, along with many organizations, an initiative called the Power to the Profession. And we'll post some of the information. You can find out more at naeyc.org/profession. And we're working with these other sort of 15 national organizations who have a stake in the early childhood profession, a membership organization made up of many of the folks who are part of this early childhood profession. And part of the goal of the Power to the Profession initiative is really to address the fragmentation of the field, to bring us together around a unified set of knowledge, competencies, and compensation that really makes the case for investment. It can be very hard for policymakers to understand exactly what it is they're investing in when our field is so fractured and diffuse. And so part of that, the theory of change behind the Power to the Profession is really to come together and make this case for increased compensation in a way that builds on the incredible work that has been done by many advocates and leaders over many years. And I think that we've really seen work even in this last year from out of the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment in Berkeley did a wonderful report on the state of the early childhood workforce that tells us very much about how early childhood educators are doing across the country when we know nearly half of them are paid so poorly that they themselves are accessing public assistance benefits. I think there's been an increased focus on this issue, and we're looking to translate that into increased investment at all levels. I'm seeing no more questions. I understand that this webinar will be available for recording and that you will get that link. I see that there may be a problem with permissions for the, which we're fixing. It's now available. And so you shouldn't have a problem with that. If there are any other questions, I encourage you to reach out to us directly. You can always email advocacy@naeyc.org with any questions, or webinars@naeyc.org if you have any questions about the webinar. We thank you all so much for taking the time this afternoon to join us. We look forward to seeing you on social media, and remember to go out and vote. Thank you all so much.